Here, Dennis, do you need one? Okay, so look, we're in the book of Ruth. We were in the book of Ruth last week, and we kind of went through somewhat of an introduction, but what I wanted to do was I wanted to get us into the story, because we get lost in the introductions and we forget what we're even trying to introduce. So we went through chapter 1, okay? And if you all remember what happened in chapter 1, a famine came upon the family of Elimelech. And he took the family, they went to Moab, which is on the other side of the river. And he died right away. I say right away, I don't know if it was right away. He died. And then him and his wife and 2 kids were there alone, and they stayed there for 10 years. And sometime in that 10 years, the boys chose Moabite women to marry. And Naomi heard that the famine was over, and they decided to go back to, oh, wait, I forgot the big part. The boys died, and so left the 2 Moabite women as widows. Naomi and the 2 Moabite daughter-in-laws started to go back to Bethlehem. And then Naomi stopped them midway and said, you know what, this isn't going to work out for you ladies, because there's nothing back there for me. I'm an Israelite, and you guys are foreigners and you're widows. It isn't going to work. You ought to turn back, go back to your families, go back to your gods, and I love you. Have a blessed life, and that. And both Orpah and Ruth said, no, we'll go with you. And then Orpah thought more, I think, with more conversation with Naomi, and she said, okay, I'm going back. She gave her a kiss, and off she went. And Naomi still tried to talk Ruth into leaving, and Ruth said, no, you can't talk me out of it. In fact, she says something almost similar to that, don't talk to me about that kind of stuff. And she goes, where you go, I'm going to go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And she takes this oath. I mean, if anything other than death separates us, something to the effect of let the curse be on me for doing that. And they went back, and people recognized Naomi when she came back. And it finishes off with, it was at the beginning of the barley season, so let's brew the beer. And that's where it started off. I said last week that the activities in the book of Ruth take place at the time of the Judges, which was the book before. And then if you look at your handout today, I just want to go back through an introduction. This will be kind of a way of also cruising through chapter 2, because you got to remember, this is just a story. There's no great theological thoughts in it. I mean, behind the scenes, there's things that, God's doing, but it's a story, okay? And so I wrote on the top there, Ruth's a small book, 4 chapters, 83 verses, 2,578 words. Anybody here wants to count them and comes up with a different figure, I'll take your figure. Okay, so let me know. It's a 15 to 20 minute read. So if you haven't sat down and read the whole, because you really need, because when we start parsing these books out, we do little piece, little piece, little piece, and you kind of forget the overall story. And this is one of those books that you can sit down, like I say, in 20 minutes, read the whole thing and get the whole idea. So it's probably written by the prophet Samuel, who also wrote Judges, which is the book immediately before Ruth, and First Samuel, which is the book immediately after Ruth. Okay. And like I said, the time period was during the book of Judges, which was probably 1375 BC to 1000 BC, in that time range. And Ruth is probably towards the end of that time period. I put a date there of 1080, like that. But I'm sure that the book was written much later than that. It's not like somebody kept a journal. like Luke, when he's writing the book of Acts, he's traveling with Paul. So he's getting the stories from Paul. He's there for some of the events and he's kind of journaling it. And then he produces the book of Acts for his friend Theophilus. I don't think that was there. So I think this is one of those things where maybe 100 years later, I don't know what the time period would be, Samuel is writing this down. Where he got it from, if somebody kept journals of the acts of the judges or whatever, we know it was later because at the end of chapter 4 of Ruth, the writer talks about the lineage that comes down to David. Well, David wasn't until what, midway through First Samuel of just coming about, and he wasn't until king until the end of First Samuel or the beginning of Second Samuel. So there's time period they unless somebody inserted it later, which could be. So anyway, so it's I wrote down it's a love story. Now here's the thing, if opposites attract in love, these are the best candidates. Yeah, because I mean it's definitely a boy meets girl story here. But Boaz is rich and Ruth, is poor. Boaz is Jewish, Ruth is not. Yeah. Hey, that would be like my wife and I. I was Jewish and she was a not. For my family, I'm sure that's what it was, and she's a not. Her family said, "Well, we're Christians," and he's a not. So Boaz, Bo, Boaz is a property owner. I mean, he's an owner of a business, and I think that some of the references for Ruth in there is she's either a worker, a gleaner. A gleaner is going to be somebody that cleans up the fields of the leftovers like that. But he's an owner, and she's a worker bee. Boaz is single, and Ruth's a widow. So you got these two opposite, kinds of people that are in the story. So I was telling somebody earlier, I think it was Kemper when he was here, that the book contains no miracles. It contains no no supernatural visitations. It's not like an angel appears and says to Boaz, "Take Ruth under your wing," or comes to Ruth and says, "Go to this field, not this field." You don't have that there. There's no divine revelations. It's funny because we came out of the book of Esther that was pretty much similar. Just there it was more so. I mean, there was no reference to God, no reference to prayer, no nothing.
But important enough that they put it in Bible.
Yeah, because we're seeing God's providence. We're seeing God work behind the scenes. These are the kind of books that you can actually learn something for in life, because when you think your life stinks, anybody ever feel that way? No, but you think, no, we've got these stories of where God was working behind the scenes. I mean, even in Esther, the people were going to get wiped out. Nobody liked the Jews even before Esther was queen. And in the end, Esther ends up by being queen. The people get saved. Mordecai ends up to be the prime minister, like second in command. And all that happened because God was working. And so we don't know in our lives. And, and whatever God may be working out in our lives may not come to fruition in our life, but it may be something that affects our kids or our society, or, I mean, we just don't know. I've got written down here in the beginning of chapter 1, it's a story of famine, family, and funerals. We saw 3 funerals, in the first 6 or 7 verses? It's a story of loss and grief, widows, 10 years in a foreign land. I mean, think about 10 years being away from home, that if it wasn't for the famine, you really weren't planning on leaving. A lot of us probably were looking forward to the day that we could, retire or afford to move or whatever and end up, here, but we did that voluntarily and not because we were driven out into the desert, to live in the hot weather. So when we get to chapter 2, we'll see that it's filled with hope. I mean, Ruth, if no one else in this story shows that she has hope. And hope overcomes grief, loss, death, famine, and exile. So I've got here, I got a passage of scripture, and because when we talk about what the times were like, remember, this is placed in the time of the book of Judges. And if you read the book of Judges, and probably it would have been gooder to do a study on the book of Judges before we got to the book of Ruth, but the book of Ruth I just kind of threw in there because we were doing a girl book on Esther. But it came up about conversion to Judaism, and Ruth did that. And like I said last week, the way that she did it was just her repentance was her change of mind of who God is. I'm not going to follow that God. I'm going to follow this God. Like that. So, but what the times were like, I mean, the times were really, really bad. So I've got this quote here from 2 Chronicles 15. And I actually, what I put on your sheet was from the Message, which is a paraphrase of the Bible. Because I like the way that they said it, because it doesn't sound quite like the old, Bible, the old Bible language, here. So here's what's happening. Well, let me just read the very first line here. It says, "Then Azariah, son of Obed, moved by the Spirit of God, went out to meet Asa, and he said, 'Listen carefully, Asa, and listen, Judah and Benjamin, etc.'" And he's going to tell them about God. Okay, now this is happening probably this is probably a couple of years after the book of Judges. Okay, when the Chronicles are being written, but he's going to hearken back. How's that for a Bible word? But when he's telling them about God, he's hearkening back, I think, to this time of the Judges to say that they were without a God. Back then they had no leaders, they had no prophets, and all. And he's hearkening back to tell them how bad it was. So I think this is a good description. I could be wrong that he's hearkening back to the book of Judges, but I decided to use it that way. He says, "Listen carefully, Asa, and listen, Judah and Benjamin." He says, "God will stick with you as long as you stick with him. If you look for him, he will let himself to be found. But if you leave him, he'll leave you. For a long time," and this is where I think he's doing the hearkening back. He says, "For a long time, Israel didn't have the real God, nor did they have the help of priests or teachers or a book. But when they were in trouble and got serious and decided to seek God, the God of Israel, God let himself to be found. God let himself to be found. At that time, it was, I like to see, at that time, it was a dog-eat-dog world. Life was constantly up for grabs. No one, regardless of country, knew what the next day might bring. Nation battered nation, city pummeled city. God let loose every kind of trouble among them. But it's different with you. Be strong, take heart. Payday is coming." Okay, now that payday is coming, what that translated was, "But you be strong and do not let your hands be weak, for your work shall be rewarded." That's the regular Bible talk. But I like the dog eat dog, work. So I think that he's describing what was happening at the time of the Judges and when this is taking place, because this is going to lead to the famine. Why is there famine? So anyway,
Gene,
yeah,
in that Chronicle quote, it says, if you leave him, he will leave you. Yet scripture said God never deserts you.
what?
God never deserts you.
I don't think it says that. I mean, God divorces Israel. I mean, it says that God divorced Israel. That's Old Testament stuff. Yeah.
I know it says it.
No, now in the quote that we had this morning in the gospel message is where Jesus says, I will be with you always. But that's New Testament stuff. And that's for his people. You got to remember, this is only for, God's promises are for his people. His curses could be for his people, but they're also for the outsiders. But yeah, you gotta watch out when you're comparing old covenant and new covenant things. There's a different relationship, with
Good point.
with God. So I probably put this out of order, but what do people do with this story? Because Ruth is one of those ones, because it is a story. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's not a hard doctrinal thing. It's a story. It's a love story, and you do it. But then people say they can't just leave it at that. And so they got to figure it all out. And so you got people, I was reading people that say, well, Boaz was an Israeli prince, an Israelite prince, you know? Even though we've got nothing that says that. Well, the only thing we read about him really is his lineage, where he comes from. And I don't think there's any princely thing in there. I think there's a Boaz or two also mentioned that we don't know that it's him in other books, you know. But we just know he's a landowner. He's a landowner among several landowners, because we're going to see he's going to tell Ruth later on, make sure you stay in my field, don't go to other fields. So we know it's not like he owned the whole valley or something like that. So, we just don't know. People say that trying to go by lineage is to say that Ruth was a Moabite princess, that so and so who was king of the Moabites, and somehow the best I could find, if they tried to link them, it had to be through a great grandfather, and how would you know? But I'm just saying that it's a simple story, and then people all of a sudden, so now what they're doing is they're joining royalty of two countries. And you have this is the way it goes. You have God's covenant people, Israel, represented by Boaz, and you have the Gentile world, represented by Princess Ruth, and that they've joined together. And isn't that the idea that Jesus Christ has joined, the church in with his covenant people? And that's true. He did. I just don't know what's in this story, So reading another guy, I've got this thing. Did anybody ever get into the law of attraction years ago? Didn't you guys just watch Oprah in the 80s? Come on. Caught you, huh? No, but this was a big thing. One of those, once she recommends a book, they really take off. And this was in churches and everything. The law of attraction is that you yourself are capable of attracting God's blessings, by, well, that's the proper response to chuckle at it. It is, but trust me, that was a big thing. And I'm watching this guy do a sermon from some time ago, and he's talking about how Ruth, we'll see in some of her language when she's talking to Boaz and to Naomi in chapter 2, they're saying that's that positive talk that attracts God's blessings. But I'm just saying, I mean, this is what people do, with books. Law of attraction. No, you're right. It's on the sheet. So anyway, let's go back to the famine, because the famine is what starts Ruth off, the book of Ruth, off. The fact that they have a famine. No famine, they don't leave town, they don't meet the Moabite woman and come back here. So what about famine? What do we know about famines? Is God involved in famines?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where's God involved in famines? That's what you get for answering.
Like, 70 years.
What's that?
Yeah. Pretty much.
Okay, no, that's a good one. The with Joseph, when he went to Egypt, and then he had the dream about the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of
It's geographically, it's located in specific areas. Because Egypt is not located.
talk a little bit louder. Talk a little bit louder. Oh. Oh, what are you gonna be like my grandkid and just be quiet now that I said talk? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so so what causes famine? One day you're going along just fine, and all of a sudden there's a famine in the land. So what? I mean, what are the physical things that cause famine? Drought. I mean, that's drought's number. Pardon?
Plagues.
Plagues? Oh, that could be, yeah. Locusts, we've seen where locusts have taken over whole fields in the, Bible. Hail, hail, giant hailstorms rip apart the crops. Winds, unrelenting winds, the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma, that stripped away all the topsoils and, all of that. So all these things, and a lot of these physical changes also will all of a sudden start affecting the rainfall, which could make it so you get no rain, which causes drought, or you're getting too much rain, which is causing floods, so. And attacks from enemies, they seize your land, they seize your crops and all that. But see, God promised that he would control all of that, but he controls it for good and for bad, and I've got on there about Deuteronomy 28. You can read it later, but it's a whole chapter, and the first half is about blessings. Okay, and God goes in detail of how he will bless all of your stuff if you obey him. Okay, he says, if you obey me, I'm going to bless you in the city. I'm going to bless you in the country. I'm going to bless you in the kneading trough. I'm going to bless you at the dinner table. I'm going to bless your crops. I'm going to bless this. I'm going to bless that. You're just going to have a whole list of blessings. That's what the first half of Deuteronomy 28 talks about. However, if you disobey me, you're going to be cursed. And it's the same things. You'll be cursed in the city, you'll be cursed in the country, you'll be cursed where your crops are growing. You will be cursed in the kitchen, the dinner table, the kneading trough. I mean, everything. Whatever he said he was going to bless, if you obeyed him, get. If you disobey him, you're gonna. So what state do we think Israel was in? I'm not saying, I don't know if this is all of Israel or if this is just Bethlehem, that area. But what state do you think they were in? Obedience or disobedience? Disobedience. Oh, remember, we're talking the book of Judges. Yeah, the whole, what is there, 20 chapters in Judges? I don't remember. It's like that. But the whole thing is just a cycle and a recycle and a recycle of the same thing happening, which is they have a problem, they turn to God, God helps them solve the problem. They go about living their life, they turn wicked again, which creates the problems, and just that continual, cycle. So this has to be a time when they're in disobedience. So what, God's telling them in chapter 28 is he's promising for their future productivity of the land will be directly proportional to their, obedience, So if you're in obedience, you're going to be happy. And if you're in disobedience, you're going to regret it. So I don't know that we can say God works that way today. Because because we don't have that kind of conditional relationship with God, you know. But then again, you don't want to toss it all away either, you know. So I mean, that's a difficult, you know, that's a difficult thing. And see, it's easy to say, well, see, for these guys, if they would have just obeyed, they would have had it fine. But how many of our issues and problems are because we disobey, you know, right?
Well, the thing that is to me, the fact that there's no information recorded in Naomi's husband and what.
Wait, there's no information for what?
And Naomi's husband, to what he had to do, what his career was like. And also the sons, they did, you know, there's a famine, so they just pack up and leave, you know, where they live in the house, where they live in the tent, where they living out on the street.
You mean during the famine?
Yeah, and then just, you know, there was.
Well, see-
So they pack up and go to, you know, it's like we're going for Lake Havasu, we're going to Parker, because Parker's the place to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, you know. and then-
Wouldn't that be sad?
Yeah, I mean, Moab is supposed to be like according to theologians, it said it was supposed to be, the toilet. And they changed it to basin, but it wasn't the toilet, it is.
You know, yeah, we don't get a whole bunch,
Yeah.
but see, when it's written to those people, they may have fully understood. When you said Moab to them, you said they went to Moab. Maybe there's the ones reading it and say, what are those people nuts? Why'd they go to Moab? Why'd they go to Parker? No, you know, because they all know what that means. We're 3,000 years later, you know, we don't know. But here's the question about the famine. Was Boaz affected by the famine? And why did they, I think somebody asked this last week, why did they go to Moab? Why didn't they just go to, you know, still go across the Jordan River? But you got to remember there's other Israeli tribes over there, you know, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. Why didn't they, you know, why didn't they go, you know, why didn't they go? What drove them to go to Moab? Pardon?
God.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, I believe more that people make choices and God works those choices. And that's what it says in Romans 8:28. You know, for God will make good, you know, all those things that are bad, he won't make those things good, but he'll work out those things that are bad to those who love him, you know, and that's conditional. It's only not for every Joe Blow out on the, you know, out on the street. So, let me see, hang on a second. I wrote something over my paper here. I can get to this. Okay, well, here, this is the point. So, so that's where the story starts, okay? It starts was during the time of Judges, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem of Judah with his wife and two sons, you know, went to stay in the territory of Moab for a while. So this sets off the choices, and this is what Linda's talking about, is this sets off the choices. What are the choices that people made? You know, Elimelech made the choice to give up his inheritance and to leave the covenant land. You know, we're going to know that he had land because Boaz is going to redeem the land too. You know, so we know that he had land and he gave up his inheritance and he chose to go to a foreign country. That's his choice, okay? I mean, that's okay, good or bad. We'll say good or bad on these choices, but we look at the choices that people make. You know, Naomi makes the choice to stay in the land after his death. I mean, she could have said, he's gone. Come on, kids, in the station wagon, we're going home. What were you going to say, Ray?
Well, the fact that they were there for 10 years too. I mean, they were established in themselves as far as what is going on. And then it isn't until he loses the husband and the two sons, he says, hey, time to get out of Dodge. Go
Yeah.
down.
Well, she may, now, at the same time, it may be, I mean, if there truly was a famine and it was bad, she may have no reason to think that the famine is over. You know, it does say in there somewhere when word came that the famine was, I forget the wording on it, it's in chapter 1 there. That's when they decided to go, that's when they decided to go back. But up until that time, maybe they had no way of, you know, they didn't have newspaper delivery. You know, the internet wasn't invented until the 7th year that they were in Moab, so they were kind of lost on what was, you know, what was happening in the information. But we don't know. But we just know that she made a choice to, you know, to stay in the land after his death. The sons made choices to marry non-covenant, non-Jewish Moabite women. You know, I mean, so I think their choice is impacting what's happening in the, you know, in the story. And then Naomi makes a choice to return to Bethlehem. There's another choice that was made because she could have said, you know, I heard that the famine's over in Bethlehem, but I'm still a widow. My husband's gone. He was the, you know, he's what held the family together in Bethlehem, and he had the resources. And if we go back, we've got nothing. So we're just going to stay put because we know what we have here. There's a choice that she makes. And then Ruth made a choice to return with her. Like that, because there's a major choice in the story. Like that. Otherwise, Boaz is just out there picking his barley leaves. You know, like that. He doesn't get to see the girl and go, wow, 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 wow. You know? So anyway, so those are the choices. God takes ordinary events to weave them together for a supernatural outcome. He's got now. I'll give this much. He's probably got something he wants to do with Boaz and Ruth. Okay? Whether that was a afterthought, I don't think there's afterthoughts with God. Yeah, I think what I'm trying to get away from is that God's moving the chess pieces around. So he took the Naomi chess piece and moved it into Moab and said, okay, how's that look? Okay, no, let's do this one. Oh, wait, we don't need a Elimelech there. Knock his chess piece off the table. You know, I mean, I don't think it's like that. But God's the one, you know, that does it. So that's how the story starts, you know, that we saw. And then we went through all of chapter 1, you know, last week. So we're into chapter 2. And since we got all this background, we don't have to spend a lot of time. We can just read through in chapter, you know, in chapter 2. So what does it say in verse 1 of chapter 2? Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side. He was a prominent man of noble character with Elimelech's family. His name was Boaz. See him on his horse riding up in that. But now, see, now this is the thing. Now this is the thing to think about with this famine and them leaving. Well, wait a minute. We find out Boaz is a close relative. You know, it doesn't seem like Boaz left. We don't even know that Boaz was affected by the famine. Now maybe he was a billionaire. Maybe he had $2 billion and he got affected by the famine. Now he only has $1 billion. So he can say, look how much I lost in that famine.
The famine was going on.
Well, you know, that could be, but I mean, but he's talking about being a close relative, and I think close relatives were, pardon? Oh, yeah. Let me see what mine said. Maybe I just add, he said he was a prominent man of noble character, or a relative, yeah, a relative of her husband's side, but she knew of him, you know, like that. So I guess we don't, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things. Like Ray said, you know, we don't get all the details. All we know is that when they return from this famine, oh, I know. And when we said last week, at the time of the barley, um, you know, harvest, you know, puts it in late April, early May of that year. But it also, it's a time of plenty. Like, you know, they're coming back just when there's going to be work to do and food to have. Okay. So, let's see. It says that he was a prominent man of noble character. Yeah, so whatever that means. I mean, pardon?
He was a good guy.
It- well, I don't know, it could have been, well, I guess the noble character would be like that, huh? So his name was Boaz. Ruth the Moabite asked Naomi, will you let me go into the fields and gather fallen grain behind someone with whom I have favor, I find favor? Yeah, interesting question. Imagine one of your kids comes up to you and says, hey, Mom, do you mind if I clean the whole house?
Monday morning yogurt.
Huh? What? Yeah. No, I mean, she said, hey, you mind if I go out and work the fields?
Say, what did you do?
Yeah, no, I mean, I mean, but it does show that Ruth's willing to work. She's willing to help her new family. She's willing to show respect to ask Naomi first.
Yeah.
Can I do this? So interesting question. Naomi answered her, go ahead, my daughter. So Ruth left and entered the field to gather grain behind the harvesters. She happened to be in the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was from Lamech. I don't know why I have trouble saying his name. Elimelech's family. Okay. So again, it introduces Boaz as being, as being a relative. It's funny because we were saying about, he's not the only farmer in the valley but this talks about having a part of the land, so maybe has enough land to be considered wealthy on and feed people and that, but maybe it's not like a giant farm. Now, if she wants to go and, the harvesters are out in the field and they're gathering, I have no idea how you gather barley. Okay. Says grain in some translations, says corn in some translations. I don't know how you gather it. Who's a farmer? I mean, who actually worked on a farm, not just a summer job. Yeah. Anyway, so they're walking around. They probably got their basket or their satchel, and they're throwing it in, and whatever they don't pick or whatever falls, the other people come up behind them to get. And how many people are out there working? For those of you who know Dennis Johnson. He comes here in the winter time from Minnesota. I think it's Minnesota, North Dakota, Minnesota. Anyway, he raises, I think, soybeans. And then in the off season, he grows grasses, like Bermuda grasses. And he found out he could make more money doing that. But anyway, so the way he harvests the fields is nothing like what we see here. He has this big John Deere harvester. I don't know. I'd have to ask him when he comes back down. How many people does that replace if you had people hand picking? I mean, is that 50 people, 100 people? I don't know, and I bet it doesn't leave much, when it's harvesting it. But his is run on GPS. He doesn't even have to be in the harvester. He could be in front of his TV watching it. He showed me on his phone, a video of that, and you map out where you want it to go in what order and how to do it. And the GPS, does it. And he can sit in his living room with his feet up, watching on his laptop or something as they harvest. So harvesting is a lot different than it used to be. Now, with his product that he's growing and harvesting, he may be feeding 100,000 people. Okay, Boaz's field maybe is feeding 10, 20 people. So it's a big, it's a big difference. So it's a big difference what the people, are doing. So later in verse 4, it says, later, when Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, he said to the harvesters, the Lord be with you. Lord, and the Lord bless you, they replied. They like the boss. Like that. How many times does your boss ever walk around to you and say, and give you a compliment like that, the Lord be with you, and that you chanted back, the Lord bless you too. Like that. So Boaz was probably special, I mean, special kind of guy.
With the good,
Pardon?
wore the white hat.
He wore the white hat. Yeah, it's probably just his personality of being generous and kind and godly. Um, he was a helpful leader. So Boaz in verse 5, and Boaz asked his servants who was in charge of the harvest. He asked the servant who was in charge of the harvesters, whose young woman is this? Oh, she caught his eye. Like that, because we're gonna find out there's other ladies in the field, so it's not like, you got a troop of 40 male day laborers, and then you got this one woman who's out there with her tiara on and like that. No, I mean, it's just, but he notices her. He goes, "Who is this young woman?" The servants answered, because the servant knew who she was. She's the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the territory of Moab. She asked, "Will you let me gather fallen grain among the bundles behind the harvesters?" She came and has been on her feet since early morning, except that she rested a little in the shelter. I mean, I like the way that this is a description of her, is that she's been here working. She's just following, picking up the scraps that the other harvesters are dropping, as they go. She's been on her feet all day, except for she took a little break in the shelter like that. Boaz probably going, "Hey, this is a good wife. She has a job. She's got a strong back. She can help me move the sofa."
Attractive.
Yeah, she's good looking probably too. We don't know, do we? Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Were you going to say something?"
Yeah, it says damsel.
Says what?
She was a damsel.
A damsel. You're obviously reading from the King James, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny thing, like the King James, somewhere where it's talking about princes or calls them dukes. Right.
Oh, we jump into conclusions in the fact that we think that.
Probably a little louder.
Are we jumping to conclusions in thinking that Naomi was some kind of an elderly person and Ruth is maybe about 20-25 years old?
Yeah, well, they probably both married young,
Yeah.
so I mean, maybe Naomi married when of course, we don't know how long Naomi was married before, I mean, we know the 10 years away, we don't know how, maybe there were 20 years in Israel before that, but I mean, there's a good chance that, maybe Naomi's a 40-year-old woman. Right. Yeah, we don't know. See, remember she had sons. We don't know how young they married. Maybe they married at 16, 17, like that. Because you got to remember the conversation that she had with Ruth when they were going, Ruth and Orpah, was that even if I went back and found a husband, and I had children, I had sons, are you going to wait for them to grow up to marry? Like that. Well, so maybe that's 16, 17 years away. I mean, again, we don't know the times. So then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, don't go and gather grain in another field, and don't leave this one, but stay here close to my female servants. See which field they are harvesting and follow them. Haven't I ordered the young men not to touch you? When you are thirsty, go and drink from the jars the young men have filled." So you see there, she wasn't obliged to just work in one field. He said, "Don't go to the other fields, stay in my fields," like that. And here we have the first, the first anti-sexual harassment law in the workplace. Boaz created that. Didn't I tell the men not to touch you? She fell face down, bowed to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor with you, so that you notice me, although I am a foreigner?" Boaz answered, "Everything you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband's death has been fully reported to me. I've checked up on you, ran a background check. Yeah, gotta watch, you might be approaching being a stalker. I don't know. But anyway, what's that?
A black widow.
Yeah. How you left your father and mother and your native land, and how you came to a people you didn't previously know. May the Lord reward you for what you have done. May you receive a full reward from the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. He's kind of praying for her now. He's saying a blessing over her. So obviously he knows there's something special about her. She says in verse 13, "My Lord, I have found favor with you, for you have comforted and encouraged your servant. Although I am not like one of your female servants." I don't know what that, probably the female servants are, I don't know if they're hired hands or they're his possessions, but Ruth's on the outskirts. She's a gleaner, just coming in to clean up what's left over so my family has something to eat. At mealtime, Boaz told her, "Come over here and have some bread and dip it in the vinegar sauce." So she sat beside the harvesters, and he offered her roasted grain. She ate and was satisfied and had some left over. The leftover part's important here. She had some left over. When she got up to gather grain, Boaz ordered the young men, "Let her even gather grain among the bundles, and don't humiliate her." In other words, he's saying, let her even grab some out of the already, bundled up, stuff, and don't point it out to her. Pull out some stalks from the bundles for her and leave them for her to gather. Don't rebuke her. So Ruth gathered grain in the field until evening. She beat out what she had gathered, and it was about 26 quarts of barley. Anybody know how much that is? I can look it up.
This is half a.
Well, that clears it up.
Somewhere around 3/8 to 2/3 of a bushel.
Bushels don't help me either.
The things at the bottom of the Bible say
Yeah.
an ephah of barley, C 29, the letter C, 29 pounds, so about 29
Okay.
pounds, which is quite a lot.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, you got to carry a bag full of that. I mean, I was years go to the store and get a 40-pound. I mean, when I try to lift, I buy the rock salt for the softener. That's a 40-pound bag. Yeah.
25.
Pardon?
25.
Well, Janet keeps saying, Janet says, "Why don't you get the 25-pound bags?" And I go, "Cause oh man, I get the 40." I know, well, no, that's it.
Then I got women that to hand.
Yeah. So anyway, so don't rebuke her. So she picked up the grain and like that. So we got 30 pounds of grain. It goes, she picked up the grain, and went to town where her mother-in-law saw that she had gleaned. She brought out what she had left over from her meal and gave it to her. So she had lunch, on the house from Boaz, saved half of it, took it home to mom. I think, again, you see these little qualities of the people. I mean, she could have eaten it all and said, "Mom, did you get anything to eat today?" Too bad. All right, let's finish this up. It says, and her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you gather barley today, and where did you work? May the Lord bless the man who noticed you." Ruth told the mother-in-law whom she had worked with and said, "The name of the man I worked for today is Boaz." Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May the Lord bless him, because he has not abandoned his kindness to the living or the dead." Naomi continued, "The man is a close relative. He is one of our family's redeemers." And we'll get into the redeemer part, but she's letting Ruth know, hey, good choice. He's a relative, and he's one of our redeemers. Ruth, the Moabitess, said, he also told me, stay with my young men until they have finished all the harvest, which means she's got gainful employment throughout the harvest season. So Naomi said to her daughter-in-law Ruth, my daughter is good for you to work with his female servants so that nothing will happen to you in another field. Ruth stayed close to Boaz's female servants and gathered grain until the barley and the wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Yeah, so that's the second part. So that gets us into her meeting Boaz, caring for her, and so again, there's that hope, the hope that overcome all that grief in, chapter 1. Naomi seems to be, a happy person. Ruth's a happy person. Boaz, we're going to find out, is going to be a happy person, So it's one of those, and they all lived happily ever after. Because remember, the story is set in this dark time of the book of Judges. The book of Judges can, kind of be compared to maybe like the medieval ages of the church, where the church had kind of glory years in its first, from like 500 BC through, I don't know, maybe 1000 BC or stuff like that, and then went dormant. The only things left there were the monasteries, monks and monasteries and Robin Hood. I don't remember the time frame, that those guys are all there. But this is kind of what the book time of the Judges is. You had Moses, you had the conquering of the land with Joshua, and then you're going to see on the other side of Judges, the kingdom, period. But then you got that. So Ruth's kind of a bride. So what are you going to say, Ray?
Yeah, wasn't there, I'm sorry, there was a phone call. Phone calling somebody. Wasn't there a covenant that said that if you're a landowner, that you, when you went to harvest, you're not allowed to harvest all of it? That you had to
Yeah, we'll cover that. We'll cover that next. We'll cover that next week. It's anybody wants to read ahead, it's Deuteronomy, the end of chapter 23 and the beginning of chapter 24. It's given the rules. It even says like if you wandered into your neighbor's vineyard or his land, you could eat what you wanted. You could eat as much as you wanted. You just couldn't take any out with you. But if you wanted to grab an apple, you could grab an apple. You just couldn't fill up a bag. But anyway, but then it gets into what Ray's talking about. It says when you harvest your field and you leave some, you can't go back for it. It's for the orphan, the widow, and Boaz, because this is a point that I'll make, is Boaz is following the law when he's got this set up for, her. Go ahead, Ray.
On one of our cruises, to bring it up to date, on one of our cruises that we stopped off.
One of our what?
Cruises.
Uh-huh.
We stopped off at an island and I asked the question of the tour guide, do you have some sort of welfare service here for the people that don't have jobs? And how do you feed people that don't have food? He says everybody has fruit trees in their yard. And basically, if you're hungry, you go to somebody else's yard and you help yourself and eat whatever you want. So nobody goes hungry.
Haven't you ever wondered why, you go to these cities that have, the parkways out there and they've got trees planted there and they're trees that drop leaves and that's it. Why they don't plant fruit trees?
Because some people complain that they don't like that fruit.
What's that? No, I mean, plant some avocado trees and plant some orange, trees and stuff like that and just have it, that the property owner has to maintain it because you couldn't really facilitate the city doing it, but that the property owner maintains it, but anybody can eat. It's not like you get a fruit tree, so you get all the oranges you want. You can take oranges for your family, but your neighbors can. It's something that they, I guess, never caught on.
Fruit trees require a lot of maintenance. They're a high maintenance crop. And also, We still practice that a lot of places in Imperial Valley in California. And you know, their crops, they leave all sorts of stuff. If it ain't pretty when they harvest it.
Right.
It fades. Give it 2 more days and it would be ripe. People are in there by swarms. Everybody in town is eating fresh lettuce now.
Yeah.
Lettuce seed. There's fresh melons and, because what's left, they go through one time, and they're out of it.
Yeah.
So they move on. So it works real well.
Yeah. That sounds like God knew what he was talking about when he set up those. Anyway, so next week we'll go into chapter 3. Maybe we'll get 3 and 4 because I don't have introductory material to. We've covered pretty much the introductory stuff. So